Okay, we're on page 95. We're talking about independent and dependent variables. All right, and it's very, very simple. Independent always comes first. Okay, dependent comes second. So independent variable, because x comes before y when you graph it, or just in the alphabet, x is always your independent variable. Okay, so on this graph, your independent variable would be the number of texts. Your dependent variable is your y-axis. So on your y-axis, this label, the amount of the bill, okay, how much money that you're charged, that would be the dependent variable. So it's in words right here, if you need it in words, if that's hard to see. The independent variable in this graph is the number of texts because it was on the x-axis. The dependent variable is on the y-axis, and in this graph, it was the amount of the bill. So on any graph, the x-axis contains the independent variable, and the y-axis contains the dependent variable. Okay? So if you had a table like this, and you had, let's say, number of texts, and then the money you were charged, because we read from left to right, we would have x here and y here. This would be the independent variable. This would be the dependent variable. Okay, if you had a table that was written like this, where you had texts and the money that you're charged for the text, that's what this graph is talking about. Then you have, this is your x and this is your y, because we read from top to bottom. All right, so this would be your independent variable, and this would be your dependent variable. So it says in the cafeteria there are 5 chairs for every round table. That means there was 1 round table for every 5 chairs, and that's exactly what this graph says. Okay, so the independent variable, okay, is on the x-axis. So if you think about it, I would have to put tables out and then put the chairs around them. So the number of round tables, that's happening first. Okay, that's the independent variable. Then you have the number of chairs is dependent on the amount of tables that you have. So the independent variable is on the x-axis, and it's the number of round tables. The dependent variable is on the y-axis, so it is the number of chairs. All right, so on example 2, we have time. Okay, now let me tell you this, and this is going to help you on your homework. Time is always x, which is the independent variable. All right, because time never stops. It's always happening. It's going to be passing by as anything is happening. So time is always x. So this is the independent variable. Okay, time is your independent variable. And distance that's measured in miles is your dependent variable. Okay, so remember, you can always pause this to write if I'm going too fast. I just don't want the video to be too long. So what is the dependent variable? So distance isn't here. So I'm going to look how they're measuring distance in miles. So there it is right there. Okay, the only other way that they might give it to you is the question, and word the question is, what are the independent quantities? Okay, a quantity is the number of something. Okay, I have 2 hands, a quantity of 2 hands. So quantity just means how many you have. So we know independence on the x-axis. Okay, there's my independent, and there's my dependent, and my dependence on the y. But I want numbers, okay? So if I make a table, it makes it a little bit easier for me. So on this dot, I have to look at the dots, not exactly how it is numbered on the axis. So it says for 1, I have 5. So for 1 day late, I pay 5 cents. So if I did my coordinate plane and remembered how my coordinate plane works, I go over 1 and up 5. So over 1 and up 5. I go over 2 and up 10. I go over 3 and up 15. I go over 4 and up 20, and I go over 5 and up 25. So again, this comes first. This is on the x-axis. This is my independent variable, and this is my dependent variable. So my independent quantities are these numbers right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My dependent quantities are these numbers right here. It's not necessarily how this is numbered. This just happens to be numbered this way. But it is where the actual dots or the coordinates, the points are. Okay? So these are the x coordinates, and these are the y coordinates of these dots. Okay? So if you look at example 4, the graph shows how many chairs are needed for each round table. So this is the same example we were talking about earlier, except now it's asking for the independent quantities. So the independent's the x-axis. So I'm just going to put an arrow down to where all these dots are pointing. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth. So it's going to be A. All right, on this one, I'm going to give you a little hint. Okay, this is very hard to read. So we have shirts, and we have our cost. So if I do this, it actually is 9. So one t-shirt costs $9. 2 t-shirts cost $18, and so forth. Okay, so 3 t-shirts. So you're noticing that there's this relationship here. That's times 9, times 9, times 9, times 9. Okay, and I'm getting my x values from where these dots are right here. I'm not just making them up. So we have 5, 6. So times 9, times 9, times 9. So my quantities that are independent, okay, are my x values. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My quantities that are dependent is 9, 18, 27, 36, 45, 54. Which axis contains the independent variable? So independent is the x-axis, dependent is the y-axis, and our relationship here is multiplicative. Okay, we were multiplying by 9 to go from x to y. So on your homework, you have a maze that looks like this. Okay, so on here, we start here, and we're looking for the independent variable. So the independent variable is hours, okay, because it's on the x-axis. So I look up hours and number of cookies. Well, it's hours, so I'm going to shade in here and go here and answer that next question. Identify the dependent variable. Well, dependent is on the y-axis, so I'm going to look at minutes walked or calories burned. Calories burned is my dependent variable, so I'm going to color in here. Okay, it takes Miss Nelson 10 minutes to grade 6 math tests. Well, we always talked about time always being x, the independent. So if minutes is the independent, the dependent is the number of papers graded. So you're going to go here. And then you're going to do the exact same way all the way through until you get to the end.